The morning mist rolled in from the channel, blurring the cliff line into ghostly shapes. I stood outside Seaward Chapel clutching the same navy umbrella I'd carried at Mum's funeral 15 years earlier. It felt like a relic now, a prop from a play that never stopped touring. Inside, the pews were already full. My father, Martin Sutton, had been beloved in this town, retired magistrate, sailing enthusiast, benefactor of the community hall. The murmured condolences were polite but quick. People saved their warmth for Daniel. Daniel arrived late, of course. He always did. Tan still clinging to his skin from whatever Mediterranean holiday had filled his final weeks before Father's decline. His arm was around a tall woman in a cream coat, Claudia, his latest fiancée, a property developer who managed to make grief look like an accessory. "Claire," he said, flashing that practiced grin. "Didn't expect you'd manage the trip from London. Still teaching, are you?" "Still breathing, Daniel," I said quietly. He chuckled, already half-turned to greet someone else. Father's coffin gleamed under the stained glass. The brass plaque read "Beloved Father, Sailor, Judge of Character." The irony made my throat ache. The service began with Reverend Hemsley's voice trembling through the vaulted air. I caught Daniel checking his watch. When the hymn faltered, he slipped his hand into Claudia's, a gesture more about possession than comfort. After the service, people drifted to the church hall for tea. I lingered by the side table, half listening as Daniel regaled a group with stories about Father's knack for spotting mediocrity. His eyes flicked to me on that last word, and laughter bubbled among the guests. I set down my cup before my hand betrayed me. He'd always known how to find the soft spot. When the crowd thinned, Mr. Avery, Father's solicitor, approached with a leather folder tucked under his arm. "Miss Sutton," he said, bowing his head slightly, "your father's will is to be read at the house this afternoon. 4 o'clock. Both siblings present." "Of course," I said. "Will Daniel be sober by then?" Avery didn't smile. "Your father was meticulous. There's also mention of a sealed addendum, to be opened only when certain conditions are met." "What conditions?" "I'll explain when both of you are there," he said, eyes darting briefly toward Daniel, now posing for a photo with townsfolk. "But I should warn you, the envelope was missing from the safe." I frowned. "Missing?" "Quite. The will can be executed without it, but the addendum might alter the division. Your father implied as much." It took a moment for the words to land. An addendum meant change, and change in Sutton matters meant conflict. That afternoon, I drove the winding road to Seaward House. The cliffs below were sheer and white, gulls circling like impatient souls. Daniel's Porsche gleamed in the gravel drive beside Father's weathered Land Rover. Inside, the air was thick with furniture polish and old arguments. The study was as Father had left it. Maps rolled in the corner, barometer ticking on the wall, and the mahogany desk that had terrified me as a child. Daniel leaned back in Father's leather chair, feet up on the rug. "Took your time," he said. "Hope you're not expecting some grand revelation." Avery's just dotting the I's. "Did you know about an addendum?" I asked. He blinked once too quickly. "Addendum?" "Mr. Avery said something's missing from the safe. Probably some sentimental nonsense. You know how Father was, always hiding trinkets like we were in some treasure hunt." Avery cleared his throat and began the reading. The will was straightforward. The estate, Seaward House, investments, and the yacht Calypso, to be divided equally. My share would suffice to clear my London debts, maybe even start a new life. But Daniel looked almost bored until Avery reached the end. And lastly, Avery read, "An addendum has been lodged for separate consideration. It is to be opened in the presence of both my children, provided the sealed envelope remains intact." He paused. "It is, however, not intact, nor present." "What?" I asked. Avery sighed. "The envelope was removed from the safe sometime after your father's passing. There was no sign of forced entry." I turned to Daniel. "You had the keys." "I was settling the accounts," he snapped. "You think I'd risk a criminal charge for a scrap of paper?" Avery's gaze was measured. "Nevertheless, the missing document must be accounted for. I'll be filing a report with the probate registry." Daniel stood. "This is ridiculous. Father wanted me to handle the estate." He said it himself. "Claire's not cut out for responsibility." That's convenient, I said. He can't confirm it now. His jaw tightened. You always assume the worst of me. Experience, Daniel. Not assumption. Avery closed his folder. Until the addendum is located, no assets may be transferred. Daniel swore under his breath. Fine. I'll have my solicitor call you. As he stormed out, Claudia followed, heels clicking like punctuation marks. When the door shut, the silence in that study felt heavier than grief. Avery placed the folder on the desk. Miss Sutton, may I advise you to look through any personal effects of your father's letters, diaries, even old keys. He may have hidden a clue. I nodded, though my mind was spinning. Later, as dusk crept through the windows, I wandered into Father's workshop. The air smelled of varnish and salt. On the wall hung a row of brass instruments. Sextant, compass, and a small tarnished key on a string labeled Calypso. I slipped the key into my pocket, feeling its weight. The yacht was moored just beyond the cove, rocking gently in the tide. I hadn't set foot on it in years. But something in me knew, if Father hit his last word, it would be where he felt most himself. That night, under the thin moon, I walked down to the harbor. The tide lapped against the hull as if whispering welcome. I unlocked the cabin door and stepped inside. The cabin smelled of old teak and whiskey. On the desk lay a folded chart, a glass ring staining one corner. Tucked under the chart was a sealed envelope. My heart stumbled. Across the front in Father's handwriting were 4 words. For when truth matters. The gulls were shrieking before dawn when I sat at the galley table aboard the Calypso, the envelope between my palms. The wax seal was intact. A deep red circle stamped with Father's signet, the same Anchoran scales emblem that once adorned his cufflinks. My hands shook not from fear but from the uncanny sense that he'd orchestrated this moment like a final trial. I hesitated before breaking the seal. The paper inside was thick, creased, written in Father's sharp fountain pen strokes. This addendum supersedes all prior distributions if one child acts in dishonor concerning the estate or the memory of my late wife, Eleanor. Should evidence of deceit, destruction, or cruelty arise, the executor shall divert that share to the local trust for seafarers' families. Let character, not blood, determine inheritance. No signature was needed. The handwriting was unmistakable. Beneath the lines, a faint smudge looked like a fingerprint pressed into ink. I sat back, exhaling. Dishonor. Deceit. Cruelty. I didn't need a law degree to see what Father had meant, but proving it would be another matter. Outside, the harbor lights flickered off as the first slant of morning hit the cliffs. I slipped the document into a waterproof folder and locked it in my satchel. Whatever came next, I'd need witnesses and time. By mid-morning, I was at Avery's office in the square, the smell of old parchment and floor polish greeting me like an institution's sigh. He looked up from his desk, startled. Miss Sutton, you shouldn't be out alone so early. I found it, I said, placing the envelope before him. He adjusted his spectacles, broke into a rare smile. My word. You did. Father hid it on the yacht. The key was hanging in his workshop. Avery read the contents carefully, his brows knitting. This changes everything. The estate division stands only if both beneficiaries are above reproach. Any misconduct could forfeit their share. I nodded. Daniel's been well, Daniel. But I can't accuse him without proof. He closed the folder deliberately. We'll submit this to the probate court as soon as possible. Until it's verified, keep quiet. Let him think it's still missing. That suited me fine. I'd learned early in our family that silence was often the only power left to the underestimated. When I drove back to Seward House, Daniel's Porsche was gone. Only Claudia's perfume lingered in the hallway, heavy and synthetic. I went upstairs to Father's bedroom, needing air that didn't smell of their smugness. On the dresser sat a small brass clock, ticking with obstinate precision. Next to it, a photograph I hadn't noticed before. Father and Daniel at a sailing regatta, both grinning, sunburned, happy. Behind the frame was another photo, me at 12, holding a model boat I'd built from driftwood. Father's hand rested on my shoulder, but his gaze had been elsewhere, already turned toward Daniel. The memory stung. I replaced the frame and sat on the edge of the bed. When my phone rang, the name flashing across the screen tightened my chest. Daniel. I answered. Claire, he said, his voice brisk, rehearsed. Avery called me this morning. Something about postponing the asset release. Care to explain? You'll have to ask him. I did. He said it was procedural. Sounds like you're meddling again. I'm doing what Father asked. Nothing more. He exhaled sharply. Don't play the martyr. We both know who handled things while you were off chasing a failing teaching career. Funny, I said. Father didn't seem to think so, judging by that addendum. There was a pause, barely perceptible but enough. Addendum? He repeated, too quickly. Yes, I said. The one you said didn't matter. His tone hardened. Be careful, Claire. You're treading close to libel. I'm only quoting Father's handwriting. Another pause, then the faint click of him ending the call. I set the phone down, heart drumming. He'd taken the bait. That evening, Avery confirmed he'd filed notice of discovery with the probate court in Exeter. We'll need to authenticate the handwriting, he said. But the clause is clear. If your brother interfered with the document, his share reverts to the trust. Can they prove he removed it from the safe? I asked. Only if we find evidence. But people slip when cornered. I drove back to the harbor, drawn by the motion of the tide. On the deck of the Calypso, gulls perched like sentinels. I thought of Father writing those words, perhaps knowing his children would one day fight over what should have united them. Inside the cabin, I noticed something I'd missed earlier. A small ledger under the bunk, wrapped in oilskin. It was Father's handwriting again, columns of dates and expenditures. The last entry read simply, Repairs Daniel 3K, no receipt. I frowned. Daniel hadn't repaired anything. He'd avoided manual work like a plague. I photographed the page, feeling the first spark of something colder than grief. Resolve. Back at Seward House, I found the front door ajar. Inside, drawers were half open, the study ransacked. Papers littered the floor like feathers after a fight. I ran to the desk. Avery's folder was gone. The air smelled faintly of Claudia's perfume. Daniel, I whispered. My hands trembled, but not from fear this time. The brass key in my pocket pressed hard against my palm, its edges biting skin. A reminder of what Father had trusted me to find. He'd left me a compass, not an inheritance, and I intended to follow it. When I walked into Seward House the next morning, the air had changed. The familiar scent of oak polish had been replaced by something faintly metallic, like the aftertaste of betrayal. Every drawer Daniel had pulled open lay gaping, their contents spilled across the Persian rug like confessions. I stepped carefully around the mess, snapping photographs for Avery before touching anything. My brother's arrogance had always been his weakness. He couldn't resist leaving fingerprints on his own undoing. In Father's desk, the false bottom I discovered years ago as a child still clicked loose when I pressed the hinge. Inside was a single object Daniel hadn't found. Father's sailing logbook. I flipped through damp-smelling pages filled with tides, coordinates, and repairs. The last few entries, though, weren't nautical, they were personal. Daniel insists the trust remain unseen. Says Claire wouldn't understand its purpose. I fear he sees legacy as ownership, not stewardship. My throat tightened. That was written only 3 weeks before Father's fall down the stairs. Officially, it was an accident. But now I wasn't sure. The brass key from the Calypso lay in my pocket, warm from my hand. I set it on the desk, next to Father's fountain pen, as if their combined weight could steady me. Then I called Avery. He answered on the first ring. Miss Sutton, I received your photographs. I've already informed the police. Only as a property disturbance for now. But if documents were stolen. They were, I interrupted. Your folder's missing. He sighed heavily. Then Daniel's put himself in deeper water than he knows. We'll request CCTV from the harbor. It's possible we can track movements between the house and the yacht. Do you believe he'd destroy evidence? Not if he thinks he can control it first. Men like your brother hoard proof until it suits them. I thanked him and hung up. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. A text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Anchor Inn at noon. Come alone. See, Claudia. The Anchor sat at the edge of the harbor road, where fishermen's nets hung like ghosts drying in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of malt and seaweed. Claudia waited at a corner table, designer coat draped across the chair like armor. Claire, she said, voice low. You shouldn't have involved the police. Then maybe Daniel shouldn't have broken in. She exhaled through her nose, glancing around. He's not thinking clearly. He's under pressure, debts, investors. He thought your father's estate would settle everything. So he tried to steal it early? Her gaze flickered. You make it sound worse than it is. It's fraud, Claudia. She leaned forward. Listen. There's more. The night before your father died, Daniel met with him here. They argued. Loudly. The barman remembers it. Something about a missing payment and the trust. The trust for seafarers? I asked. She nodded. Daniel didn't want half his inheritance going to charity. Said it was sentimental nonsense. My stomach twisted. Do you know if father threatened to change the will? Claudia hesitated. I think he already had. I sat back, the pub spinning slightly. Then Daniel had motive. She reached across the table, her manicured hand almost trembling. If he goes down, I go down with him. He used my account to move the money. What money? The 3,000 in that ledger. He made it look like repairs on the Calypso. It was a cash transfer. Off the books. I swallowed. Do you have proof? She pulled a folded receipt from her handbag. A marina invoice signed with Daniel's initials. Keep it, she said. I'm done covering for him. Outside, the wind had turned sharp. I walked back toward the cliffs, the receipt crumpled in my fist. Daniel's mask was cracking, but Avery would need more than fragments. We'd need a timeline, motive, and paper trail. That evening, the house was eerily still. The police tape stretched across the study door fluttered like a warning. I ignored it and went straight to Father's workshop. The smell of varnish steadied me again. His tools hung in precise order, each with its shadow outline drawn on the pegboard. He'd once told me, a misplaced tool tells a story of haste, Claire. Near the workbench, a drawer resisted when I tried to open it. Inside was a metal box locked. The same keyhole shape as the brass one from the Calypso. My pulse quickened. The key slid in perfectly. Inside were sealed envelopes, each labeled in Father's handwriting. One caught my eye. Harbor Maintenance Confidential. Inside were photographs of the pier accounts, and a note clipped to the top. Daniel's discrepancies noted. Confrontation due. I sank onto the stool, the room tilting slightly around me. Father had known. He'd gathered evidence quietly, the way he did everything, methodical, patient, certain that truth would surface eventually. I photographed every page, backed them up to the cloud. Then I locked the box again, slid it back into place and pocketed the key. When I left the workshop, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The waves glowed copper in the last light. Daniel's Porsche pulled into the drive just as I reached the steps. He got out, face tight, voice clipped. You've made quite the scene, Claire. Only because you did first. He smiled thinly. You really think you can win this? You were never Father's favorite. He knew you'd waste everything on principle. Maybe, I said. But at least I still have mine. He stepped closer, his shadow long across the gravel. You should watch yourself. Grief makes people careless. Funny, I said. Father wrote something similar. His eyes narrowed, but I held his gaze until he looked away. When I shut the door behind me, my knees nearly gave out. But my fear had changed shape. It was no longer paralyzing. It had purpose now. Tomorrow I'd meet Avery with Claudia's receipt and the photos from Father's box. Whatever Daniel thought he controlled, the tide was about to turn. 2 weeks after the break-in, I found myself standing beneath the cold arches of the Exeter probate court, the air humming with quiet authority. The marble floors clicked under my shoes like a metronome, each sound measuring how close we were to the moment that would decide our family's future. Avery met me in the corridor, his umbrella dripping from the rain. Stay calm, Miss Sutton. Let the evidence speak. He'll overplay his hand. I've spent 30 years watching him do exactly that, I said. I'll try to enjoy the encore. Inside, the courtroom was small, its walls lined with oak panels and solemn portraits. Daniel sat across the aisle in a tailored suit, his expression crafted to convey calm competence. Claudia wasn't with him. She'd given a written statement instead. For her safety. When the registrar called our case, the murmur of spectators stilled. Avery began with the basics. the will, the missing addendum, the recovered version found aboard the Calypso. He presented photographs, timestamps, and Claudia's receipt linking Daniel to the forged repairs. Daniel's solicitor, a sharp man named Price, objected at every turn. Speculation, he said. No proof my client ever accessed the safe. Avery's tone stayed even. Then how did the sealed document vanish while he held the keys? The safe shows no forced entry. Price countered smoothly. Perhaps the deceased misplaced it. I couldn't stop myself. My father didn't misplace anything, least of all justice. Judge Hollis, a woman in her 60s with kind but unyielding eyes, raised a hand. Miss Sutton, please let your counsel speak. I bit my tongue, but Daniel's smirk across the aisle made it worth the reprimand. Avery continued, producing the ledger and father's note about confronting Daniel. The deceased documented financial irregularities tied directly to his son. We have the handwritten ledger and corroborating receipts. Price leaned forward. That note proves nothing. Families argue over money all the time. Indeed, Avery said. But few argue the night before one party suffers a fatal fall. The air shifted. Even the judge looked up sharply. Price bristled. Are you implying my client caused his father's death? No, Your Honor, Avery replied calmly. I'm implying he had motive to conceal evidence afterward. Daniel's mask cracked for a heartbeat. His jaw flexed, eyes darting to me. The judge cleared her throat. We'll focus on the will. Continue. Avery called me to the stand next. My palms were damp as I took the oath. Miss Sutton, he began, you located the addendum. Could you explain how? I described finding the brass key, the Calypso, and father's words. For when truth matters. Avery handed me a photograph. Is this the same key? Yes. And this note in your father's hand? Yes. Did anyone know you were searching the yacht that evening? No one. I went alone. He nodded, then turned to the judge. The authenticity of the handwriting has been verified by an expert. The clause stands. Price rose, pacing. Miss Sutton, you claim you found this document after the funeral, unsupervised, on a vessel accessible to anyone. Isn't it possible you planted it? The question hit like a slap. No, I said firmly. My father's handwriting isn't something you fake. I grew up with it. Price smirked. People forge signatures all the time. And you, by your own admission, have debts. A rustle swept the room. I met his gaze. Yes, I have debts. Student loans, bills, ordinary life. But not the kind that make you steal from your father. Judge Hollis's pen scratched across her notes. That's enough, Mr. Price. Stick to evidence. He bowed stiffly. No further questions. When I stepped down, my knees wobbled. Avery gave a discreet nod, approval or reassurance. Then Price called Daniel. He took the stand like a man stepping onto a stage, voice soft, mournful. My sister and I were never close, Your Honor. I tried to include her, but she resented Father's trust in me. I would never dishonor his memory. Avery rose. Mr. Sutton, did you handle your father's accounts before his death? Yes, with his consent. And did you transfer £3,000 for repairs to the yacht? Yes, on Father's instruction. Instruction we can't verify since he's gone? Daniel's smile flickered. You can check the accounts. We did. The funds were withdrawn in cash and deposited into your fiancée's account the same day. The silence in the courtroom was sudden and absolute. Daniel hesitated. That was reimbursement. She handled the payment. Avery unfolded Claudia's statement. Miss Hale confirmed she did not. She believed the transfer was fraudulent and provides this receipt. Daniel's expression froze. For the first time I saw fear, not the dramatic kind but real quiet fear. Judge Hollis leaned back. Mr. Sutton, you're aware that falsifying expenses related to an estate can void your beneficiary rights? Yes, Your Honor. And you still maintain your innocence? He swallowed. Absolutely. The judge nodded slowly. Then we'll examine the evidence in full. When court adjourned for recess, Daniel brushed past me in the corridor. You think this makes you noble? He hissed. You're tearing down what's left of this family. I turned to him. You did that the moment you broke into Father's house. His jaw clenched. You'll regret this, Claire. You always do. Avery stepped between us. "Walk away, Mr. Sutton." Daniel sneered but obeyed, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Avery waited until he was gone. "He's unraveling. Tomorrow's testimony will decide everything." I nodded, though my chest felt like a storm. "Do you think the court will side with truth?" He smiled faintly. "They usually do once the tide turns." That night I couldn't sleep. Rain lashed against the window of the small inn where I was staying. I sat by the lamp, rereading Father's letter until the ink blurred. For when truth matters. He hadn't written if truth matters, he'd written when. He'd known it would be tested. By morning I felt steadier. The tide was shifting and Daniel could feel it too. Tomorrow, his empire of charm would meet its first crack of daylight. After the first court session, I returned to Seward House under a sky the color of pewter. The gulls were quieter than usual, circling in slow spirals as if even they sensed the tension lodged in those walls. The house had always been Daniel's stage and my prison. Now for the first time I entered it with the keys and the law on my side. Avery had insisted I retrieve any remaining financial documents before the second hearing. The police had cleared the premises for access, provided I catalogued everything. The front door creaked open to a stale silence. Dust hung in the air like old gossip. I moved room by room, photographing, noting, opening drawers I hadn't dared touch since childhood. In Father's wardrobe, behind neatly folded jumpers, I found a small safe box, portable, the kind bankers used decades ago. Inside, receipts. Dozens of them. Some legitimate. Yacht maintenance, house repairs, charitable donations. Others questionable. Large cash withdrawals, vague consultation fees. And checks made out to names I didn't recognize. One, however, froze me. It was dated the day before Father's death, £10,000 paid to Tregoron Building and Survey. The memo line read, "Property evaluation, urgent." I'd never heard of that firm. I photographed everything and sent the image to Avery with a short message. Could this be related to the trust? His reply came almost immediately. "Leave the documents secured. I'll check records." Don't confront him yet. But yet was a word I'd stopped obeying, because Daniel was already there. His car was parked behind the hedge, half hidden from the road. When I stepped outside, he emerged from the garage, coat damp from drizzle, eyes bloodshot. "So," he said, voice low, "you've moved in already." "I'm retrieving evidence," I said. "Legally." He laughed once. "Legally. You always did love that word, like it could save you. Father believed in it too. Father believed in control," he snapped. "That's what you never understood. Everything was about him, his image, his judgment. He made us compete for crumbs of approval. And you stole the loaf instead?" His face tightened. "You think you're better because you followed rules? Look at you, living in a shoebox flat, teaching bored kids who'll forget your name. Meanwhile, I built something, until you ruined it." "You ruined it yourself," I said quietly. "And Father saw it coming." He stepped closer, raindrops beating on his collar. "You've no idea what I've done for this family." "Then show me," I said. "Explain the £10,000 to Tregoron Building." The flicker in his eyes told me enough. "You're bluffing," he said. "Try me." He smiled thinly. "You really want to dig up the past? Fine. That money was to revalue Seward House. Father planned to sell it, cut both of us out and dump the rest into that ridiculous trust. I was protecting what was ours." "You mean what was yours?" "He was going senile, Claire. You think that addendum means anything? He didn't even remember where he kept his keys." "Funny," I said, "because I found them exactly where he left them." For a moment the rain was the only sound. Then Daniel exhaled a soft, dangerous sigh. "You don't know when to stop. I learned from you." He turned sharply, walking toward his car. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts. The court won't buy your sob story." As he drove off, the gravel spat under his tires, and I stood in the drizzle shaking, not from fear this time, but from the sharp realization that he was desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. That evening Avery called. "Claire, the name you sent, Tregoron Building and Survey, doesn't exist. The registration was dissolved 3 years ago. It's a shell company. Created by Daniel? I'd wager yes. And we'll prove it tomorrow." He paused. "Are you all right?" I'm angry, I said. That's something. Good, he replied. Anger, when tempered, is proof you still believe in justice. I hung up and went to the study window. The tide was high, the calypso rocking against its moorings. For the first time, the house didn't look like an inheritance. It looked like evidence. The next morning, I drove back to Exeter for day 2 of the hearing. The courtroom felt smaller, the air heavier. Avery began with the new discovery. Your Honor, we have confirmation that the company to which Mr. Sutton authorized payment does not exist. Its listed address is a derelict shopfront in Barnstaple. Bank records trace the funds to an account in his name. Price objected, of course. Circumstantial. Avery didn't blink. Circumstantial until you see this. He projected an enlarged bank statement. Funds were withdrawn in cash, then deposited into an account belonging to Miss Claudia Hale 2 days later. A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel's knuckles whitened. Judge Hollis leaned forward. Mr. Sutton, this aligns with prior evidence of misrepresentation. Do you wish to respond? Daniel's voice was low. It was reimbursement for services rendered. What services? He hesitated. Consulting on property matters. With a dissolved company? He said nothing. The judge's gaze was steady. Mr. Sutton, you are aware that misusing estate funds before probate constitutes misconduct under Section 58 of the 1925 Act? Yes, Your Honor. Then you understand the implications of this addendum clause? He swallowed. Yes. Avery folded his papers. In light of this, we request the court suspend Mr. Sutton's beneficiary rights pending full investigation. The judge nodded. Granted. For a long moment, Daniel just stared ahead, expression blank. When the gavel struck, the sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. He turned to me then, eyes blazing, not with sadness but humiliation. And I knew that to him was worse than loss. After the session, I found Claudia waiting by the courthouse steps, cigarette trembling between her fingers. You did it, she said softly. He's finished. I shook my head. Not yet. He'll find another angle. She sighed. Then be careful. He's been drinking again. I don't know what he'll do. Neither do I said. But Father always said storms reveal what's anchored and what isn't. That night, I drove back to Devon under a bruised sky. Seward House loomed against the cliffs, lights flickering like uncertain hope. In the study, I placed the brass key and the ledger on Father's desk. Together they seemed to hum with meaning. A reminder that truth, like tide, keeps returning. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I watched the dark sea and whispered to the empty room. We're almost there, Father. But somewhere beyond the cliffs, another engine started. Daniel wasn't done yet. The storm hit Devon 2 nights after the suspension order, rattling the windows so hard I thought the sea itself might come clawing through. I barely slept, half listening for Daniel's car, half hoping the gale would wash away everything connected to the Sutton name. At dawn the wind calmed. Mist clung to the cliffs like breath on glass. I made tea and sat at Father's desk, tracing the embossed letterhead of the probate court order. Daniel's inheritance was officially frozen. Yet I couldn't shake the unease that something still lurked unfinished. A knock at the door startled me. It was Avery, coat dripping, briefcase held like an anchor. I couldn't risk sending this by post, he said. You'll want to see it. Inside the case was a folder marked Tregoron Holdings, dissolved. He flipped through the pages. Turns out the shell company wasn't just Daniel's toy. It linked to 2 dormant accounts under your father's charitable trust. He was preparing to expose misuse of those funds. I frowned. Misuse by whom? Avery's eyes met mine. Daniel, and an external accountant named Wicks. They siphoned small amounts monthly. Nothing large enough to trigger audits, but over 2 years it added up to nearly £80,000. The number made me dizzy. So Father knew. He suspected, Avery said. The building survey payment was his trap. He wired funds to Tregoron, waited for Daniel to move them, and recorded everything. Recorded? Avery smiled thinly. Audiocassettes. He was old-fashioned, remember? He pulled a small tape from the folder. A white label read simply Harbor, June 9th. We set the old player on Father's desk, the same one he'd used for dictations. The tape hissed, Then his voice filled the room, steady, weary. Daniel, this ends now. The trust isn't yours to strip. You'll repay the account or face the board. Daniel's voice tense. You wouldn't dare drag your own son through court. Try me. A pause, then Daniel again, softer. You'll regret this, old man. The tape clicked off. Silence spread through the study like a second tide. I pressed my fingers to my temples. This is enough to bury him. Avery nodded. And to clear your father's name. Tomorrow we'll submit it to the registrar. The addendum clause activates automatically once deceit is proven. Outside, thunder muttered far offshore. When Avery left, I stood for a long time at the window, staring at the path winding down to the cove. The gulls wheeled low, restless. Then movement caught my eye. A dark figure near the boathouse. Daniel. I grabbed my coat and went out before reason could stop me. The wind whipped hair into my face as I descended the cliff path. Daniel turned when he heard my footsteps, rain jacket half-zipped, eyes hollow. Breaking in again? I called. He gave a short laugh. Can't break into what's mine. It isn't yours anymore. So you think. He pulled a small envelope from his pocket, waving it like a trophy. Father left more than one secret. This is an old letter from him, dated before the addendum. Says the estate should go to me alone. I stepped closer, cautious. Let me see it. Afraid not. His grin was jagged. But the court will. Then why are you here hiding with it? His hand trembled slightly, rain streaking his face. Because I know you, Claire. You'll twist anything to play the saint. But deep down you wanted this. You wanted to win. I wanted fairness. He laughed bitterly. Same thing to you. A wave crashed below, salt spray rising like smoke. I looked at him, the brother who'd turned every kindness into competition, every silence into a weapon, and I realized I didn't hate him anymore. I just pitied him. Daniel, I said quietly, Father didn't test us for wealth. He tested who we'd become without it. You've answered that test yourself. For a second something flickered behind his eyes, remorse maybe, but then the wind tore the envelope from his hand. It fluttered toward the sea, vanishing over the cliff's edge. He lunged too late. Brilliant, he muttered. Even the sea takes your side. Perhaps it just knows the difference between truth and lies. He glared, then turned away, shoulders hunched. You'll see me again in court. I watched him climb the path back to the car, the outline of a man shrinking against the storm. That night I sealed Father's tape in a new envelope, marked evidence, probate court, Exeter. The brass key lay beside it. Two simple objects, but they felt like the end of an era. The next morning the sea was calm. The storm had broken. So too had Daniel's hold on the narrative. When Avery collected the tape, he said quietly, The tide's on your side now, Miss Sutton. Just let it do its work. But tides have a habit of uncovering what's been buried too long. And Devon still had one more secret waiting under the waterline. The hearing reconvened 3 days later in a different setting, the Harbor Trust's glass-fronted boardroom overlooking the quay. Morning sunlight glinted off the moored boats, bright and cruel, as if even the sea wanted to watch the spectacle. Inside, a dozen trustees sat around the long table, men and women who'd known my father for decades. They looked weary. Gossip had already reached them, but they wanted proof, not whispers. Avery and I sat at one end. Daniel arrived late again, tireless, jaw tight, a man who traded arrogance for defiance. Chairwoman Mallory opened the session briskly. We are gathered to determine whether the late Martin Sutton's charitable trust has been misused. Both beneficiaries are present. Mr. Avery, proceed. Avery rose. Thank you, Madam Chair. We have uncovered conclusive evidence of misappropriation. Financial statements, false invoices, and crucially, an audio recording of a conversation between the deceased and his son. He set a small player on the table and pressed play. Father's voice filled the room. Daniel, this ends now. The trustees leaned forward. When Daniel's own voice followed, You'll regret this, old man. A ripple of murmur spread like wind over water. When the tape clicked off, silence hung heavy. Mallory turned to Daniel. Mr. Sutton, do you deny that is your voice? He hesitated too long. I don't recall the conversation. Avery's tone was dry. Memory tends to sharpen when one's inheritance depends on it. Daniel's solicitor tried to intervene, but Mallory lifted a hand. Enough. The recording, bank statements, and forged company registration speak for themselves. This board recognizes gross misconduct. Daniel's face drained of color. You can't strip me of family property. That's illegal. It's precisely what the addendum authorizes, Avery said. Misconduct diverts your share to the trust. I hadn't spoken yet. I'd promised myself I wouldn't gloat. But when Daniel turned to me, fury flickering behind his eyes, words came anyway. Father didn't leave us wealth to hoard, Daniel. He left us a compass. You lost yours. He slammed a fist on the table. Don't you dare moralize. You were always jealous, too afraid to admit it. Maybe once, I said softly. Not anymore. The trustees signed the resolution. One by one, pen scratch paper, final, irrevocable. When it was done, Mallory looked at me. Miss Sutton, as co-executor, you'll oversee the transfer of Mr. Sutton's forfeited assets to the Harbor Trust. We hope you'll continue your father's legacy. I nodded, unable to speak. Daniel stood, eyes wild. You think this ends it? I'll appeal. I'll take every last one of you down with me. No, you won't, Mallory said. Because the Trust's Council has already filed notice with the Financial Crimes Unit. The matter's out of our hands. He froze, realizing too late how small the room had become around him. Avery gathered the papers calmly. Your father believed character would reveal itself, Mr. Sutton. Today it has. When Daniel finally left, the door slammed so hard the window panes rattled. The trustees exhaled as if they'd been holding the same breath. Mallory turned to me. You did the right thing, though I imagine it doesn't feel like victory. It feels, I said quietly, like the tide going out. That evening I walked the harbor path alone. The Calypso swayed gently, ropes creaking against the pier. The air tasted of brine and relief. Avery joined me, hands in his coat pockets. It's over, more or less. He'll face financial charges, maybe a suspended sentence if he cooperates. The trust will be secure. Father would have liked that, I said. He'd have liked that you found the courage he never quite showed with his son. I watched the horizon where sea met sky. He left me the key for a reason. Yes, Avery said. He knew you'd open the right door. We stood in silence, gulls wheeling overhead. Then Avery handed me a small envelope. This arrived at my office this morning. Your father addressed it to you, but marked deliver only after final judgment. My breath caught. I took the envelope carefully, the handwriting instantly familiar, steady, confident, unmistakably his. Later, in my father's study, I opened it. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, the truth has done its work. Don't let bitterness anchor you. Justice is not vengeance. It's balance restored. Use what remains of Seaward House as you will, but keep the sea in sight. It reminds us nothing stays buried forever. For when truth matters, love always follows. Father. Tears blurred the page. For the first time since the funeral, I allowed myself to cry, not for loss but for release. Outside, the tide began to rise again, whispering against the rocks like an echo of forgiveness. Tomorrow, I'd meet with the trust board to sign the final documents. Daniel's era was finished, but fate had one last gesture left. A small, unexpected kindness from the very man who tried to ruin everything. The morning the paperwork was finalized, Devon was uncharacteristically bright. The sea shimmered blue and gold beyond the cliffs, the kind of light father used to call sailor's mercy. A calm after the storm. I walked up the gravel path to Seaward House, the folder of transfer deeds under my arm. The air was sharp with salt and lilac. Gulls wheeled overhead as if signaling an ending. Inside, the house was strangely peaceful. The scent of polish, the faint hum of the grandfather clock, even the distant thrum of the tide. It all sounded like closure. Avery had already left for Exeter to file the final documents, leaving me alone to lock up the estate. On Father's desk lay the last letter, the one I'd read again and again since the hearing. For when truth matters, love always follows. Each time I saw the words, their weight shifted. Once they'd felt like a benediction, now they felt like a task. I opened the window, letting the sea air in. Papers fluttered, light and free at last. Then, as I turned toward the fireplace, something unexpected caught my eye. A small parcel wrapped in oilskin tucked behind the clock. Inside was a brass compass, old and heavy, engraved with the initials MS Father's. Underneath it, a note. For Claire, to find your own bearings when mine no longer guide you. I held it to my chest and smiled. Even in death he was still teaching, still steering. A car crunched over gravel outside. I glanced through the window. Daniel. He'd lost weight. His once perfect hair was unkempt, his suit rumpled. When I opened the door, he looked nothing like the man who had strutted through courtrooms or laughed at funerals. Claire, he said quietly, may I come in? I hesitated, then nodded. You've got 5 minutes. He stepped inside, eyes roaming over the empty shelves and stacked boxes. So it's done then? Yes. The house will go to the Harbor Trust. I'll stay on as trustee. He nodded, jaw working as if chewing regret. They froze my accounts. Claudia's gone. She took what was left. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. He looked at me sharply, as if surprised by compassion. You won, Claire. You got everything. No, I said softly. I just stopped losing. For a moment we stood in silence, the kind that carries more truth than any argument. He shifted, pulling a crumpled envelope from his coat. This was Father's too. I found it weeks ago behind the picture in the hallway. It's not what you think. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. Me and Daniel as children on the Calypso, Father's hands on our shoulders. On the back, in his handwriting, it read, "My best work, if only they'd see it." I swallowed hard. Why didn't you show me this before? Because, Daniel said, voice cracking, I didn't want to remember that version of us. We stood there, the house echoing with ghosts of a simpler time. Finally, he said, I'm leaving Devon. London, maybe abroad. There's nothing for me here. I nodded. Maybe that's best. He looked toward the sea. He really loved you, you know. More than he ever said. I smiled faintly. He loved you too. He just didn't know how to show it. Daniel's eyes glistened. I thought taking control was the only way to matter. It's not, I said. Sometimes surrender is the only control we have. He nodded slowly, then turned to go. At the door he paused. Take care of the house, Claire. And the trust. Make something good of it. I will. When his car disappeared down the lane, the silence that followed felt lighter. Not empty but earned. I walked back to Father's desk, set the compass on it, and turned it so the needle faced true north. Then I took the ledger, the brass key, and the tape and locked them away in the safe. Not to hide them but to keep the story complete. That evening I went down to the harbor. The Calypso rocked gently, restored and gleaming after repairs funded by the trust. Children from the seafarers' families were learning to sail. Their laughter carried across the water. The morning the paperwork was finalized, Devon was uncharacteristically bright. The sea shimmered blue and gold beyond the cliffs, the kind of light Father used to call sailor's mercy. A calm after the storm. I walked up the gravel path to Seaward House, the folder of transfer deeds under my arm. The air was sharp with salt and lilac. Gulls wheeled overhead as if signaling an ending. Inside, the house was strangely peaceful. The scent of polish, the faint hum of the grandfather clock, even the distant thrum of the tide, it all sounded like closure. Avery had already left for Exeter to file the final documents, leaving me alone to lock up the estate. On Father's desk lay the last letter, the one I'd read again and again since the hearing. For when truth matters, love always follows. Each time I saw the words, their weight shifted. Once they'd felt like a benediction, now they felt like a task. I opened the window, letting the sea air in. Papers fluttered, light and free at last. Then, as I turned toward the fireplace, something unexpected caught my eye. A small parcel wrapped in oilskin tucked behind the clock. Inside was a brass compass, old and heavy, engraved with the initials MS Father's. Underneath it, a note. For Claire, to find your own bearings when mine no longer guide you. I held it to my chest and smiled. Even in death he was still teaching, still steering. A car crunched over gravel outside. I glanced through the window. Daniel. He'd lost weight. His once perfect hair was unkempt, his suit rumpled. When I opened the door, he looked nothing like the man who had strutted through courtrooms or laughed at funerals. Claire, he said quietly, may I come in? I hesitated, then nodded. You've got 5 minutes. He stepped inside, eyes roaming over the empty shelves and stacked boxes. So it's done then? Yes. The house will go to the Harbor Trust. I'll stay on as trustee. He nodded, jaw working as if chewing regret. They froze my accounts. Claudia's gone. She took what was left. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. He looked at me sharply, as if surprised by compassion. You won, Claire. You got everything. No, I said softly. I just stopped losing. For a moment we stood in silence, the kind that carries more truth than any argument. He shifted, pulling a crumpled envelope from his coat. This was Father's too. I found it weeks ago behind the picture in the hallway. It's not what you think. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. Me and Daniel as children on the Calypso, Father's hands on our shoulders. On the back in his handwriting it read, "My best work, if only they'd see it." I swallowed hard. Why didn't you show me this before? Because, Daniel said, voice cracking, I didn't want to remember that version of us. We stood there, the house echoing with ghosts of a simpler time. Finally, he said, I'm leaving Devon. London, maybe abroad. There's nothing for me here. I nodded. Maybe that's best. He looked toward the sea. He really loved you, you know. More than he ever said. I smiled faintly. He loved you too. He just didn't know how to show it. Daniel's eyes glistened. I thought taking control was the only way to matter. It's not, I said. Sometimes surrender is the only control we have. He nodded slowly, then turned to go. At the door he paused. Take care of the house, Claire. And the trust. Make something good of it. I will. When his car disappeared down the lane, the silence that followed felt lighter. Not empty but earned. I walked back to Father's desk, set the compass on it, and turned it so the needle faced true north. Then I took the ledger, the brass key, and the tape and locked them away in the safe. Not to hide them, but to keep the story complete. That evening I went down to the harbor. The Calypso rocked gently, restored and gleaming after repairs funded by the trust. Children from the seafarers' families were learning to sail. Their laughter carried across the water.